An unsettling silence settles in the room when you look at yourself in the mirror after crying without sound. Your face is swollen, your eyes red, your vision slightly blurred. But what truly startles you is not the physical exhaustion. It is the strange sensation that you are staring at someone unfamiliar, not the woman you have carefully maintained, refined, adjusted to fit expectations. Not the pleasant version, the agreeable version, the strong version, but a soul stripped of performance. Bare, honest, unprotected, and in that moment, something irreversible happens. You realize you cannot go back to who you were. There is a quiet collapse that precedes every real transformation. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It begins with fatigue, with a heaviness in your chest, with the unbearable weight of pretending that everything is fine when something inside you has been fracturing for years. Carl Jung once wrote that the soul has an innate longing for wholeness, not perfection, not applause, not approval, wholeness, harmony between the social self and the deeper inner being. But to reach that harmony, there must first be rupture, the breaking point, the moment when politeness feels like betrayal, when smiling feels dishonest, when being good feels like self-abandonment. Suddenly the roles feel suffocating, the obligation to be appropriate, to be accommodating, to be emotionally available, to be the stable one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't cause problems. You no longer have the energy to perform competence or serenity for the comfort of others. And this exhaustion is not weakness. It is initiation. It is the beginning of individuation. The process Jung described as becoming who you truly are, beneath all adaptation. Some women spend their entire lives searching for love, while never truly living as themselves. They are praised for sacrifice, admired for resilience, valued for obedience. But deep within, there is a silent sigh, no. One hears. A part of them longs to breathe freely, to exist without constantly editing their personality. Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is not romantic advice. It is psychological confrontation. For centuries, women have worn archetypal masks, the obedient daughter who knows when to smile, the sensual lover who knows how to please, the perfect mother who places everyone else first, the dependable partner who absorbs emotional storms. These archetypes are not inherently false. Jung described archetypes as primordial images embedded within the collective unconscious. The mother, the maiden, the caregiver, the lover. They help us navigate society, but when one archetype becomes the entire identity, the psyche fractures. A woman who lives exclusively as the selfless mother may forget she is also a creator, a sensual being, an explorer. A woman who inhabits only the good girl archetype often loses access to anger. She cannot say no. She cannot express desire without guilt. Over time, she becomes divided, externally admired, internally suffocated. This is where the tension begins, between the persona and the authentic self. The persona in Jungian psychology is the social mask. It is how we adapt to the world. It allows us to function, to belong. But when the persona becomes rigid, when we cling to it for safety, we forget the face behind it. We mistake adaptation for identity. And then one day, the shadow rises. Jung described the shadow as the rejected aspects of the personality. The emotions, we were told, were unacceptable: anger, jealousy, sexuality, ambition, assertiveness. For women especially, the shadow is often filled with traits labeled too much, too emotional, too loud, too independent, too ambitious, too sensual, too angry. To be loved, many learn to hide these qualities, to compress them, to silence them. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It accumulates energy. It erupts in depression, in anxiety, in unexplained resentment, in sudden breakdowns after years of apparent success. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When the shadow is unseen, it governs from the dark. The real journey begins when a woman stops fearing her shadow and begins dialoguing with it, when she allows herself to feel anger without shame, to admit desire without apology, to say no without explanation, to leave roles that once felt like destiny but now feel like cages. This transition is chaotic. She is no longer who she was, but she does not yet know who she is becoming. Relationships may tremble, expectations may shatter. The world around her may not recognize her. This in-between space is psychologically sacred. It is the space Jung associated with transformation, the symbolic death before rebirth. It feels disorienting because the old identity is dissolving. The persona is cracking. The shadow is surfacing. But beneath the turbulence, something authentic begins to breathe. Darkness is not the enemy, it is the guide. Jung insisted that enlightenment does not come from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness conscious. When a woman dares to confront the parts of herself she once rejected, she reclaims energy that was trapped in repression. Anger becomes boundaries, sensuality becomes vitality, ambition becomes purpose, sensitivity becomes intuition. Wholeness is not about becoming softer or harder. It is about integration. A woman in individuation does not abandon her nurturing qualities. She simply refuses to let them define her entirely. She does not suppress her independence. She learns to wield it with awareness. She becomes multidimensional. This transformation is rarely applauded. It is often misunderstood. When a woman begins to prioritize authenticity over approval, she may be called selfish. When she stops over-functioning, she may be called distant. When she expresses anger, she may be called dramatic. But individuation is not about pleasing the collective. It is about reconciling with the self, the integrated center of the psyche. There comes a moment when she looks into the mirror again, and the face staring back is not polished but real. There is strength in her gaze, not because she conquered the world, but because she stopped conquering herself. The shadow no longer terrifies her. It informs her. It protects her. It reminds her of what she will no longer tolerate. She learns that not every relationship survives authenticity. Some connections were sustained only by her compliance. Some roles existed only because she played them flawlessly. But the loss of illusion is not tragedy. It is alignment. The individuation process is not linear. There are days of clarity and days of confusion. Days when the old persona tempts her back with familiarity. Days when guilt whispers that she is becoming too much. But with each honest decision, the self strengthens. Wholeness does not mean being perfectly balanced at all times. It means accepting contradiction, being both nurturing and assertive, both soft and firm, both loving and boundaried. The integrated woman no longer fragments herself to fit into expectations. She contains multitudes. The unsettling silence in front of the mirror was not the end. It was the threshold. The breaking was not destruction. It was revelation. The exhaustion was not weakness. It was resistance. Dissolving. To become oneself is not a glamorous journey. It is often lonely. It requires losing versions of yourself that once kept you safe. It requires confronting truths that destabilize the ego. But on the other side of rupture is coherence. And coherence is power. Not power over others, power over the fragmentation within. When the persona softens and the shadow is integrated, something profound happens. She stops living in reaction to expectation and begins living in response to inner truth. Her decisions become less frantic. Her presence becomes grounded. She no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth. She embodies it. Jung believed the task of human life is to bring light into the darkness of mere being. For a woman shedding her masks, that light does not come from external validation. It comes from radical honesty, from accepting the parts of herself she once exiled, from reconciling with her shadow instead of fighting it. The mirror will never look the same again. Because the woman staring back is no longer curated, she is integrated. She is no longer performing wholeness, she is becoming it. And once that process begins, it cannot be undone. She becomes deeper, more compassionate, more powerful in a way that cannot be taught or imitated. It is not something she learns from a book or performs for an audience. It is something forged in solitude, in confrontation, in truth. I once heard a woman describe this transformation with quiet awe. She had been the perfect wife, always kind, always composed, always putting others first. Her identity was built on being dependable, agreeable, indispensable. Then one afternoon, without warning, her husband asked for a divorce. No dramatic fight, no grand explanation, just an ending. The ground beneath her collapsed. At first, she panicked. She blamed herself. She tried to repair what was already dead, but eventually she entered therapy, not because she wanted to fix the marriage, but because she no longer recognized herself. During those sessions, a painful realization emerged. She had never truly lived for herself. Every decision had been filtered through the question, will this make me lovable? She began journaling, walking alone in the forest, painting clumsy canvases with trembling hands, screaming into the air, crying without apologizing. One day she said, I don't know who this woman is, but she feels more alive than I ever have. That was her essence, buried beneath compliance. Layer by layer, it began to surface. When a woman transcends her shadow and her masks, she does not become a more polished version of herself. She does not become the ideal woman. She becomes real, messy, complex, at times unpredictable, but alive. And that aliveness radiates. It carries a presence others can feel, but cannot define. Not because she is flawless, but because she is authentic down to her core. In a world of curated images, filtered emotions, and constant instruction about how women should behave, the act of facing one's shadow and choosing oneself is revolutionary. A woman who dares to descend into her own darkness in order to retrieve her light transforms not only her life, but the atmosphere around her. People gravitate toward her, not because she tries to be adored, but because she has chosen truth over approval. And then comes the second threshold. When the masks fall and the shadow is no longer avoided but confronted directly, the woman steps into a new phase, not one of immediate peace, but of ruins. The old identity crumbles slowly. Jung never romanticized this stage. Individuation does not begin with comfort. It begins with crisis. Have you ever fallen so deeply that you were forced to rediscover yourself? For many women, rebirth begins with psychological shock, an unexpected divorce, a cold goodbye after years of loyalty, a betrayal by a trusted friend, or something quieter, a morning when she wakes up and cannot find a single reason to get out of bed. What once felt meaningful suddenly feels hollow. Every role, every habit, every expectation loses substance. When the external scaffolding collapses, the deeper self begins to speak. Jung wrote that anyone who seeks to confront the problem of evil must begin with self-knowledge. In darkness, in pain, lies an opportunity for understanding. Perhaps you have sat in that silent room where no one calls, where the silence stretches so long you begin to hear your own thoughts clearly for the first time. You believe you are alone, but in truth, you are meeting someone essential, yourself. Jung described this as inner alchemy, not the avoidance of suffering, but the transformation of it. Just as ancient alchemists sought to turn lead into gold, the psyche turns collapse into awakening. Wounds become doors, ruins become foundations. A woman once wrote about her life that appeared perfect: stable marriage, healthy children, respectable career, family pride. And yet one morning, after the house emptied, she sat at the breakfast table and began to sob. There was no dramatic trigger, just a void, a trembling emptiness so profound it frightened her. She spiraled into depression. But instead of numbing it or rushing back to normalcy, she began writing. She documented her hidden longings, the dreams she abandoned, the times she said yes when her body screamed no. While reading Jung, she encountered the phrase, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." She cried again, not from despair, but from recognition. Her suffering had meaning. If your chest tightens reading this, if you are asking, "Why me?" perhaps this is not your collapse. Perhaps it is your beginning. The soul does not remain asleep forever. At some point it demands life. Often it awakens through pain. Jung never encouraged bypassing suffering with forced positivity. He believed transformation happens when we remain present with ourselves amid chaos. To face fragility at the height of weakness is not defeat. It is initiation. A woman who awakens is not one who has never fallen. She is one who has known invisibility, who asked for help and heard silence, who loved others so fiercely she abandoned herself. And in those unseen nights, something shifts. Not rage, not vengeance, but a quiet commitment to no longer betray herself. This commitment is subtle but irreversible. She begins to question every inherited belief. Why did I tolerate that? Why did I silence that? Why did I shrink there? The answers are uncomfortable. They expose conditioning, fear, dependency on validation, but they also reveal power. Rebirth is rarely dramatic. It happens in small decisions, choosing solitude over toxic familiarity, speaking truth in a trembling voice, declining invitations that drain the soul, allowing grief to complete its cycle instead of suppressing it. This is not about becoming hard or cold. It is about becoming integrated. The woman who emerges from awakening is not immune to pain. She simply understands it differently. She recognizes suffering as information, as invitation, as catalyst. She stops asking, "How do I avoid this?" and begins asking, "What is this teaching me?" The ruins of her former identity become fertile soil. She may lose relationships, not because she became unlovable, but because she stopped performing lovability. Some connections cannot survive authenticity. Some bonds were built on her silence, but she no longer negotiates her essence to maintain comfort. This phase can feel isolating. Jung referred to it as the night sea journey, the descent into the unconscious, where the ego feels destabilized. It is terrifying because the familiar dissolves. Yet it is also sacred because it births coherence. Gradually, she reconstructs herself, not according to expectation, but according to alignment. She redefines strength, not as endurance of disrespect, but as clarity of boundaries. She redefines love, not as sacrifice, but as reciprocity. She redefines success, not as approval, but as integrity. She becomes someone who does not need to announce her awakening. It is visible in her posture, in her calm, in the way she no longer chases what diminishes her. Her presence feels grounded, not loud, not performative, just real. This is the power of inner rebirth. Jung believed the task of life is to become who you are, not who you were told to be, not who you adapted into, but who you are beneath conditioning. That journey demands the courage to endure the collapse of illusion. If you are in the middle of that collapse, do not rush it. Do not interpret it as failure. Rupture is not destruction. It is revelation. And when the dust settles, you may look in the mirror once more. This time, the woman staring back will not be perfectly composed, but she will be awake, and that changes everything. From this moment forward, I will not abandon myself again. Have you ever believed you had reached the absolute bottom? A moment so dark, so disorienting, that you were certain nothing good could ever rise from it, and yet somehow you rose, not because someone saved you, not because the circumstances suddenly changed, but because something within you refused to die. That was not luck, that was sacred alchemy. Jung described transformation as something that does not begin with denial, distraction, or fantasy. It begins with truth, brutal, unfiltered truth. In the darkness, in the loneliness, in the confusion, your soul is whispering something radical. I am mine. It is ironic that society still teaches that an attractive woman is one who never collapses, never cries too hard, never reveals weakness. But the women who have truly broken, who have sat alone with their grief and refused to numb it, carry a healing force that cannot be imitated. They do not speak loudly, they do not try to convince, they radiate presence, not because they are flawless, but because they have been melted down and reshaped from within. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest gift of existence is not to be admired, it is to be real. If you are standing now in that grey space where the old version of you has collapsed and the new one has not yet fully formed, do not rush to escape it. Stay, feel, write, scream if you must. Like an alchemist tending the furnace, you are forging something sacred. In that red-hot fire, a woman is being born, not from ideals, not from approval, but from ashes. You are closer than you think. Something inside you is shifting. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the miracle. After the storm, when the ashes still smolder quietly in your chest, something subtle begins to happen. This woman no longer searches for rescue. She no longer waits for someone to descend into the abyss and pull her out. She no longer writes desperate messages, trying to stitch together relationships that are already fragments. She does something that once felt impossible. She stays with herself. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is a silent internal pivot, a movement from begging to belonging, as if the soul has stopped pleading and started speaking. Have you felt that morning when you wake up and, for the first time, you no longer care how you are perceived? When the performance exhausts you more than solitude ever could? That is the emergence. That is the beginning of the integrated woman. Jung described this shift as the movement from the persona, the social mask, to the self, the center of psychic wholeness. When a woman sheds the artificial layers and returns to her essence, she is no longer a product of expectation. She becomes sovereign. She does not require validation to feel worthy. She becomes worthy by existing authentically. A woman like this does not impose her strength. She does not prove it. She knows when to speak and when silence holds more power. She can be soft without being weak, firm without being cruel. She is no longer fragmented, no longer fighting. Herself, her light and shadow have entered dialogue. In Jungian terms, she has moved towards psychic integration. This integration gives her a magnetism that cannot be taught. People feel it before they understand it. It is the quiet authority of someone who has descended into herself and returned. To understand this transformation fully, we must look at Jung's concept of anima and animus. According to him, every psyche contains its inner opposite. Men carry an inner feminine image. Women carry an inner masculine image, the animus. When a woman's animus remains immature, she often seeks direction, structure, and validation from external masculine figures. She may unconsciously depend on partners to define her worth, to guide her decisions, to give her strength. But when her animus matures, something profound changes. She develops internal authority. She learns to think independently, to set boundaries without guilt, to act not from emotional reactivity, but from conscious clarity. She no longer seeks a savior. She seeks equality. I once met a woman who had spent decades shrinking herself to maintain peace in her marriage. She dimmed her intelligence, softened her opinions, smiled through resentment. One day, she left, not out of hatred, but out of integrity. When I asked her what gave her the strength, she said quietly, "I have been with myself long enough to know I cannot abandon her anymore. That is a mature animus, not aggressive, not loud, just steady, clear, unshakable." If you are walking this path, you may notice your world rearranging itself. People who once felt close may now feel distant. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Relationships built on performance may begin to dissolve. Do not panic. Your frequency is shifting. When a woman begins living in truth, everything that is not rooted in truth naturally falls away. This is not loss. This is alignment. And here is the most beautiful part. A woman integrated in her wholeness does not captivate through appearance or charm. She captivates through presence. In her eyes there is depth. In her walk there is groundedness. In her silence there is power. She does not chase admiration. She embodies authenticity. Truth does not scream. It radiates. This does not mean life becomes easy. Integration is not perfection. It is coherence. She still feels sadness. She still experiences doubt. But she does not fracture under them. She understands that vulnerability and strength are not opposites. They are companions. She no longer betrays her intuition for approval. She no longer negotiates her boundaries for companionship. She no longer confuses attention with love. She understands that real intimacy begins when masks fall. And this is where many misunderstand the integrated woman. They think she has become detached, cold, unreachable. In reality, she has become deeply connected to herself, and from that connection flows a healthier connection to others. She does not cling. She chooses. She does not beg. She invites. She does not fear solitude. She honors it. Jung believed that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, is the central task of life. It is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about becoming real. And reality is complex, contradictory, alive. If you are still in the fire, trust it. If you are still shedding skins, let them fall. If you are still trembling in uncertainty, remember, the soul often rebuilds in silence before it reveals its strength in the world. You are not falling apart, you are coming together. And when the integrated woman finally stands, no longer fragmented, no longer pleading, no longer performing, she does not need to announce her rebirth. It is visible in her peace. It is audible in her steady voice. It is undeniable in her boundaries. From this moment forward, she does not abandon herself again. And that changes everything. The real power of an integrated woman is not found in how she speaks, dresses, or moves. It is found in how she thinks when no one is watching. It is found in the silent negotiations she no longer makes with herself. It is found in the boundaries she upholds, even when they cost her comfort. There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that performing has exhausted her, that being agreeable has drained her, that trying to be everything for everyone has left her hollow, and in that hollow space, something unexpected begins to grow. Clarity, not the kind of clarity that comes from advice, not the kind that comes from motivational slogans, but the kind that rises from the ashes of disappointment, from betrayal, from heartbreak, from the slow realization that she abandoned herself in order to be accepted. Carl Jung understood this fracture deeply. He knew that the persona, the social mask, was necessary for survival. But he also warned that if we over-identify with it, we lose access to the self. We begin to believe we are the mask. And when a woman begins to sense that she has been living as a mask, something inside her revolts. It does not happen loudly, it begins quietly. a discomfort in conversations that once felt normal, a resistance to laughter that feels forced, a tightening in the chest when she says yes, but means no. The body knows before the mind admits it. This is the beginning of restructuring. At first it feels like loss. Relationships shift, familiar dynamics crumble. She may be accused of changing, of becoming cold, of becoming distant. But what is truly happening is this. She is withdrawing projections. For years, she may have projected her strength onto others, seeing them as leaders, protectors, decision-makers. She may have projected her worth onto relationships, believing she was valuable only if chosen. She may have projected her identity onto roles, mother, partner, daughter, employee. But now, she is reclaiming those fragments. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond collective expectations. It is not a smooth ascent, it is a dismantling. The integrated woman stops asking, "How do they see me?" and starts asking, "How do I experience myself?" That shift changes everything. She begins to evaluate her life not by applause, but by alignment. Does this relationship feel reciprocal? Does this work honor my energy? Does this environment nourish my mind? And when the answer is no, she does not erupt dramatically. She simply adjusts. She leaves the room quietly. She declines. The invitation. She closes the door. There is a profound difference between being desired and being respected. For years, she may have been desired for her beauty, her warmth, her ability to accommodate, but now she seeks something deeper, mutual depth, mutual awareness, mutual presence. This is where real magnetism is born. A woman who has integrated her shadow does not need to advertise her worth. She does not overshare to prove vulnerability. She does not perform independence to appear strong. She is simply stable. Stability is rare. Stability is seductive because most people are fragmented. Most people are still chasing validation, still bargaining with their truth. But when someone stands before you who is not negotiating with themselves anymore, you feel it. They are not trying to convince you. They are not trying to impress you. They are not trying to be chosen. They have already chosen themselves. This is why the integrated woman becomes magnetic without effort. She is no longer scanning the room for approval. She's no longer adjusting her tone to maintain acceptance. She's grounded in her own perception, and that grounding shifts her entire worldview. She no longer views love as something to earn. She views it as something to share. She no longer views success as something to prove. She views it as something to build in alignment with her values. She stops competing with other women, because competition dissolves when self-worth is internalized. She can admire without envy. She can disagree without insecurity. This is the alchemy Jung spoke of, not a mystical fantasy, but the psychological transformation that occurs when the ego aligns with the self. But make no mistake, this process is not glamorous. It involves grief. Grief for the version of herself who tried so hard to be acceptable. Grief for the years spent shrinking. Grief for the relationships built on illusion. There is a loneliness in awakening, a space where she no longer fits into old dynamics but has not yet fully built new ones. And this is where many retreat, because it is easier to return to the familiar mask than to stand alone in authenticity. But the integrated woman endures this phase. She allows the silence. She allows the discomfort. She allows the restructuring. She understands that if she fills the space too quickly, she will repeat the pattern. So she waits. She observes. She rebuilds slowly. Her routines change. She wakes earlier, not because she must, but because she wants time with herself. She journals, not to document productivity, but to hear her own thoughts. She spends evenings in solitude, not as isolation, but as restoration. She becomes selective, selective with her time, selective with her energy, selective with her words, and in that selectivity she becomes powerful. Because power is not dominance, power is discernment. Discernment in who has access, discernment in what deserves attention, discernment in what aligns. The woman who once over-explained now speaks simply. The woman who once overgave now pauses. The woman who once chased now attracts. And here is the paradox. The less she needs to be desired, the more she is, because neediness repels. Wholeness attracts. Jung believed that the self represents totality, the union of conscious and unconscious. When a woman integrates her shadow, her animus, her persona, she no longer operates from fragments. She is not torn between softness and strength. She embodies both. She is not afraid of being misunderstood. She understands herself. She is not terrified of loss. She trusts her resilience. And trust in oneself is the most compelling trait a human can possess. If you feel something shifting within you, if you sense that you can no longer tolerate inauthenticity, do not rush the process. Do not romanticize it either. It is work. It requires radical honesty. It requires facing the parts of you that are jealous, angry, insecure, controlling. It requires admitting that you are not always kind, that you have manipulated, that you have feared abandonment so deeply you abandoned yourself first. But once you see it, you are free to choose differently, and choice is everything. The integrated woman does not become perfect. She becomes conscious, conscious of her patterns, conscious of her projections, conscious of her desires, and consciousness dissolves compulsion. She no longer reacts automatically. She responds deliberately. She no longer seeks to fill emptiness. She creates from fullness. This is why she is not loud. She does not need to convince. She does not need to argue. She does not need to dominate. Her presence speaks before she does. And when she walks away from what dishonors her, she does so without spectacle. Because she understands something fundamental. The most powerful transformation is silent. It happens in the mind. It happens in the nervous system. It happens in the moment she decides, I will not abandon myself again. That decision, repeated consistently, reshapes her entire life, not overnight but permanently. And once she tastes that alignment, there is no going back to the mask. There is only forward, into truth, into depth, into herself, and given its rightful place. There comes a moment when she no longer tries to suppress one part of herself to elevate another. She no longer believes she must be only soft or only strong, only nurturing or only independent, only mystical or only rational. She begins to sense that the fragmentation she once lived with was never her true nature. It was conditioning, it was survival, it was adaptation. Now, something deeper is happening. Integration. Carl Jung believed that the psyche is not meant to be one-dimensional. It is a living ecosystem of archetypal energies, each carrying wisdom, instinct, and power. When a woman unconsciously over-identifies with one archetype, she becomes rigid. But when she consciously integrates them, she becomes fluid. And fluidity is freedom. The lover within her is no longer reduced to seduction or romantic validation. It becomes her capacity to feel fully, to taste life, to move with sensual awareness, to allow desire without shame. She does not suppress longing, but she also does not let longing control her. Passion becomes creative force rather than emotional dependency. The mother within her is no longer self-sacrifice without boundaries. It becomes conscious nurturing. She cares without depletion. She gives without abandoning herself. She protects what is sacred, her time, her energy, her body, her mind. The mother archetype matures into discernment. The maiden within her is no longer naive innocence seeking rescue. It becomes curiosity, playfulness, openness to possibility. She allows herself to be new again. She permits reinvention. She does not cling to cynicism as armor. There is lightness in her again, but it is chosen, not unconscious. And then there is the magician, the wise woman, the inner seer. This archetype emerges when she trusts her inner knowing over external noise. She listens to patterns, she senses timing, she reads between words. She does not need constant proof because she has cultivated perception. She understands that intuition is not fantasy, it is the language of the unconscious. Jung often wrote that symbols are the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. And as she integrates her archetypes, her life becomes symbolic. She notices synchronicities. She pays attention to dreams. She feels when something is misaligned without needing dramatic evidence. Her world becomes textured. And here is what changes fundamentally. She no longer experiences herself as divided. There was a time when she felt torn between career and family, between independence and partnership, between vulnerability and strength. But integration dissolves the war. She can be ambitious and nurturing. She can be sensual and wise. She can be assertive and compassionate. This wholeness creates coherence, and coherence radiates stability. You can feel when someone is coherent. Their words match their energy, their boundaries match their values, their actions match their truth. There is no internal contradiction leaking into the room. This is why integration alters relationships so dramatically. Some people will drift away because they were attached to a fragment of her, the overly agreeable version, the overly available version, the endlessly forgiving version. When she becomes whole, those dynamics cannot survive. And yet something remarkable happens. New people enter her life, those who are not intimidated by depth, those who are not threatened by boundaries, those who do not need her to be small in order to feel big. Jung called this alignment of inner transformation and outer reality synchronicity, not causation in a mechanical sense, but meaningful coincidence. When her internal structure changes, the outer world reorganizes. But this reorganization requires courage, because integration demands that she release borrowed beliefs, beliefs about what makes a woman worthy, beliefs about what love should look like, beliefs about success, sacrifice, aging, beauty, obedience. She begins questioning narratives she once accepted as absolute, and questioning destabilizes comfort. There may be moments when she feels untethered, when she wonders if she is losing her identity, but what she is actually losing is illusion. Jung warned that individuation separates you from the collective mindset. It can feel isolating. You may no longer resonate with conversations that revolve around comparison, gossip, or superficial validation. But in that solitude, something stabilizes, her inner compass. She no longer requires consensus to make decisions. She listens inwardly. She senses what expands her and what contracts her. She trusts that sensation. Trust becomes her anchor. And slowly, her life restructures in practical ways. Her home changes. It becomes a reflection of calm rather than chaos. Her schedule changes. It reflects intention rather than obligation. Her friendships change. They are fewer but deeper. Her romantic standards change. She no longer negotiates alignment for temporary affection. She stops explaining herself excessively. She stops rehearsing conversations in her mind. She stops chasing clarity from those who cannot offer it. Instead, she cultivates clarity within. And something extraordinary happens when a woman integrates her inner archetypes. She becomes internally resourced. She no longer looks outward first for strength, validation, direction, or comfort. She has built an internal council, the lover, the mother, the maiden, the wise one, all in dialogue. She consults herself. And this is the moment when true sovereignty emerges. Sovereignty is not rebellion. It is alignment. It is the quiet confidence of someone who has met her shadow, embraced her archetypes, and stopped fragmenting her identity to fit expectations. She no longer lives reactively. She lives deliberately. She does not chase intensity. She chooses depth. She does not seek drama. She values clarity. She does not hunger for attention. She cultivates presence, and presence is what people feel when she enters a room. Not because she demands attention, but because she is fully inhabiting herself. If you sense this shift happening within you, if you feel yourself becoming less willing to compromise your truth, do not resist it. You are not becoming distant. You are becoming defined. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming clear. You are not losing people. You are shedding misalignment. Integration is not about perfection. It is about permission. Permission to be complex. Permission to be contradictory. Permission to evolve. The lover will rise and fall. The mother will rest and return. The maiden will explore and retreat. The wise woman will observe and guide. And together they form a whole. A woman who no longer fractures herself to survive. A woman who no longer performs for belonging. A woman who does not ask to be chosen, because she has already chosen herself. And from that choice, a new life is built. Not on illusion, not on expectation, but on truth that is embodied, lived, and irreversible. This is not the end of her transformation. It is the beginning of a life where every part of her is allowed to exist. It by walking through the darkness that once frightened you. You must sit with the parts of yourself you tried to silence. You must face the grief, the anger, the envy, the longing, the hunger you were told were too much. And when you do, something sacred happens. The darkness does not devour you. It reveals you. A woman becomes whole not by polishing her light, but by reclaiming her shadow. There is a profound shift that occurs when you stop asking, "How do I become better?" and begin asking, "What have I been pretending not to know about myself?" That question is dangerous in the most beautiful way, because it dismantles illusions, it strips away performance, it confronts the persona, the carefully curated identity you built to survive. For years, perhaps decades, you were rewarded for being agreeable, for being accommodating, for being emotionally available even when you were empty, for smiling when you were exhausted, for forgiving when you were hurt, for shrinking when you were brilliant. And none of it was weakness. It was adaptation. But adaptation, when it outlives its purpose, becomes self-betrayal. The moment you realize that being liked cost you your authenticity is the moment individuation truly begins. Jung described individuation as the movement towards psychological wholeness, the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the reconciliation of opposites within the psyche. It is not a comfortable process. It is not socially applauded. It often feels like loss before it feels like liberation. You may lose relationships that were built on compliance. You may lose identities that once gave you status. You may lose certainty, but what you gain is something infinitely more powerful: integrity. Integrity is not moral perfection. It is internal alignment. It is the experience of no longer splitting yourself in order to belong. You no longer silence your intuition to maintain harmony. You no longer dilute your voice to avoid discomfort. You no longer apologize for occupying space. And here is the paradox. When you stop trying to be desirable, you become undeniable, not because you are louder, but because you are real. There is a different quality in the eyes of a woman who has integrated her contradictions. She does not flinch when confronted. She does not over-explain. She does not scramble to repair the emotional reactions of others. She stands, she listens, she responds, not reacts. That steadiness is magnetic. It is born from having survived your own depths. Many women fear that if they stop being the good one, they will be abandoned. But what if the abandonment you fear is simply the shedding of dynamics that required your smallness? What if being misunderstood is the price of becoming whole? Jung insisted that wholeness requires confronting what we most resist, the parts of you that were labeled dramatic, the parts that were labeled difficult, the parts that were labeled intimidating. Within those rejected traits often lies your power. Your anger may contain your boundaries. Your sensitivity may contain your intuition. Your independence may contain your leadership. Your refusal may contain your self-respect. But to access them, you must stop negotiating your existence. There comes a quiet day when you wake up and realize you no longer want to argue your worth. You no longer want to convince someone to see you. You no longer want to be interpreted correctly by everyone. You want peace, not the peace of avoidance, the peace of self-recognition. You look in the mirror, not to adjust yourself for approval, but to meet your own gaze. And in that gaze there is no performance, there is no silent plea, there is recognition. This is me, not perfect, not finished, not immune to doubt, but mine. There is something profoundly stabilizing about belonging to yourself. It softens desperation, it quiets comparison, it dissolves the frantic need to measure up. You begin to move through the world differently, not with arrogance, but with rootedness. You stop chasing intensity disguised as love. You stop mistaking anxiety for chemistry. You stop confusing chaos with passion. Instead, you choose resonance, mutuality, depth, and this changes everything. Your relationships become mirrors of your self-respect. You no longer tolerate emotional inconsistency. You no longer accept crumbs and call it devotion. You no longer stay where your nervous system feels unsafe, because you have learned that your body speaks truth long before your mind does. You have learned that exhaustion is not just physical. It is often the cost of pretending. You have learned that silence can be sacred when it is chosen. And you have learned that walking away is not failure. It is discernment. Jung believed that the psyche strives toward balance. When we deny parts of ourselves, tension builds. Symptoms emerge: depression, anxiety, numbness. They are not always enemies. Sometimes they are signals, invitations, indicators that the life you are living no longer matches the woman you are becoming. And becoming is not linear. There will be days you feel powerful, days you feel uncertain, days when the old mask tempts you because it was easier to be agreeable than to be authentic. That does not mean you have regressed. It means you are human. Wholeness includes fluctuation. The integrated woman does not erase her softness to prove strength, nor does she erase her strength to preserve softness. She allows both. She can say no without cruelty. She can say yes without self-abandonment. She can grieve and still move forward. She can desire and still remain sovereign. This is not perfection, it is psychological maturity. And maturity is deeply attractive, not because it seeks attention, but because it emanates stability. The most powerful transformation is invisible. It is the internal decision to no longer betray yourself for comfort. It is the quiet commitment to honor your intuition, even when it disrupts familiarity. It is the courage to let people misunderstand you rather than misrepresent yourself. You do not become whole by collecting more knowledge. You become whole by releasing what is not you, the roles that suffocated you, the expectations that confined you, the beliefs that minimized you. Layer by layer you shed them, not violently, but consciously. And underneath you find something steady, something ancient, something that was never broken. Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege is not glamorous. It is often lonely. It demands honesty, so radical it shakes the foundation of your identity. But on the other side of that honesty is freedom. Freedom to speak without rehearsing. Freedom to rest without guilt. Freedom to desire without shame. Freedom to exist without justification. and perhaps the most profound freedom of all, the freedom to coexist with every part of yourself without internal war. Light and shadow, tenderness and ferocity, longing and contentment, structure and spontaneity. They are not enemies. They are the architecture of your psyche. When you stop trying to amputate parts of yourself to be digestible, you stop bleeding energy. When you stop performing goodness and begin embodying truth, your presence changes. You become grounded. You become clear. You become difficult to manipulate. And strangely, you become deeply desired, not because you seek it, but because authenticity resonates at a frequency that cannot be fabricated. If there is a part of you that has been knocking, an archetype silenced, a desire postponed, a boundary avoided, do not ignore it. Integration is not about adding something new. It is about allowing what is already within you to breathe. Ask yourself gently, where have I been shrinking? Where have I been pretending? Where have I been afraid to be seen fully? Then slowly begin, not with grand gestures, but with one honest sentence, one boundary, one decision aligned with your truth. Wholeness is not achieved overnight. It is built choice by choice. And one day, you will look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back, not as an ideal, not as a projection, but as a presence. A woman who has faced her darkness. A woman who has integrated her archetypes. A woman who does not ask permission to exist. A woman who is not chasing love but embodying it, and in that quiet recognition you will understand. You did not lose yourself. You were becoming yourself all along. Darkness is not your enemy. It is the threshold. You must be willing to sit with the ache instead of anesthetizing it. You must allow the grief to move through you instead of performing strength for an audience that never asked how you were really doing. You must touch the memories you buried because they were inconvenient, embarrassing, or too heavy for the version of you that needed to survive. And it is from that exact place, not from perfection, not from approval, not from external validation, that you begin to shine, not with borrowed light, not with a glow manufactured by filters and forced positivity, but with a radiance that comes from integration. There is a kind of brilliance that only emerges after collapse, a quiet, steady glow that belongs to a woman who has walked through her own underworld and returned with herself intact. She is not shining because she avoided pain. She is shining because she metabolized it. If you are somewhere in the middle of this journey, confused, dismantled, uncertain of who you are becoming, understand something essential. Confusion is not failure. It is transition. It is the space between identities. It is the shedding of skin that no longer fits, and you are not alone in it. We are living in a time where women across the world are waking up at the same time, waking up from inherited silence, from generational guilt, from the myth that love requires self-erasure, from the lie that strength means emotional suppression. Every time you speak your truth, even if your voice trembles, something shifts in the collective field of womanhood. Every time you say no without apology, you disrupt a pattern that has lived for generations. Every time you choose compassion over self-criticism, you weaken an ancient narrative that taught women to police themselves before anyone else could. This is not just personal growth, this is psychological revolution. Jung believed that the individual psyche is not isolated. It is woven into what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypal patterns and inherited psychological structures. When you transform yourself, you do not do so in isolation. You send ripples through that invisible web. When one woman refuses to shrink, others feel permission to expand. When one woman heals her relationship with her anger, her daughters learn that boundaries are sacred. When one woman chooses self-respect over emotional starvation, her mother's unspoken grief finds a strange kind of relief. You are not only healing your own story, you are interrupting a lineage. Think about that. There were women before you who did not have language for what you are now articulating. Women who endured silently because survival required compliance. Women who carried dreams they could not speak aloud. Women who loved deeply but never learned to love themselves. When you choose yourself, not out of defiance, not out of isolation, but out of devotion to your truth, you honor them. You become the continuation of their courage, and you become the origin point for something new. It is easy to believe that your inner work is invisible, that your journaling, your therapy sessions, your silent tears, your private decisions do not matter beyond your own life, but they matter more than you can measure. Because the psyche is relational, energy is relational, patterns are relational. When you stop betraying yourself, you alter the relational field around you. Some people will fall away. Some dynamics will dissolve. Some expectations will collapse. Let them. You were never meant to maintain structures that required your fragmentation. You were never meant to live small so that others could remain comfortable. You were never meant to ask permission to exist fully. There is a version of you ahead. Not a fantasy version, not a perfected one, but a whole one. A woman who trusts her intuition without arguing with it. A woman who rests without guilt. A woman who desires without shame. A woman who loves without abandoning herself. She is not far away. She is formed by each courageous decision you make today. Each time you choose honesty over approval. Each time you choose growth over familiarity. Each time you choose yourself over fear. And yes, there will be loneliness at times. Transformation often requires solitude, not because you are unlovable, but because you are recalibrating. You are learning to differentiate between attachment and alignment, between attention and intimacy, between intensity and depth. In those quiet moments when doubt creeps in and you wonder if you are too much, too sensitive, too complicated, remember this: you are not too much. You are simply compressed. You are not too sensitive. You are navigating environments that punished perception. You are not too complicated. You are multidimensional, and multidimensional women cannot live in one-dimensional roles. The world may not always understand the woman you are becoming. Some will say you have changed. Some will say you are distant. Some will say you are harder. They are right. You are harder to manipulate, harder to silence, harder to define, but you are softer with yourself. And that softness is the foundation of real strength. Behind you stands a river of women returning to themselves. Ahead of you stands the fully integrated woman you are growing into. And right here, in this exact moment, all you have to do is make one decision. Choose yourself. Not in arrogance, not in isolation, but in love. Choose yourself when it is inconvenient. Choose yourself when it disrupts expectation. Choose yourself when your old patterns beg you to shrink. The world reorganizes around truth. It always does. It may resist at first. It may shake. It may test you. But eventually, it aligns with the frequency you embody. You were never meant to live a diminished life. You were never meant to dilute your depth. You were never meant to apologize for your expansion. You are here to live honestly, to live deeply, to live in full alignment with the woman you are becoming. And the most powerful thing you can do for yourself, for the women before you, and for the ones who will come after is this: stop asking for permission. Stand in your truth, and let your light be born from the darkness you were brave enough to face. Darkness. You must walk through it. You must embrace the pain instead of numbing it. You must dare to touch the things you once buried just to survive. And it is from that exact place, not from performance, not from borrowed, Confidence, not from pretending you are unbreakable, that you begin to shine, not with a light reflected from someone else's approval, not with a glow manufactured to be liked, but with a fire that rises from within. If you are somewhere in the middle of this journey, confused, dismantled, uncertain of who you are becoming, hear this clearly. You are not alone. We are a generation of women waking up at the same time, waking up from inherited silence, from emotional self-sacrifice disguised as virtue, from the myth that love requires self-erasure. We are choosing ourselves now, not from fear, but from love. Every time you speak your truth, even if your voice trembles, something shifts. Every time you establish a boundary, even if your hands shake, something ancient cracks open. Every time you stop criticizing yourself for being too much, you weaken a pattern that has been passed down for generations. These are not small acts. They are seismic. In the language of depth psychology, every act of inner integration sends ripples through what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological field that binds humanity together. When you heal, you do not heal in isolation. You create resonance, you create permission, you create a silent signal that reaches women you may never meet. There are thousands of women waiting for someone to go first, waiting for someone to say, I will no longer apologize for existing. I will no longer abandon myself to be loved. I will no longer shrink to fit expectations that suffocate my soul. When one woman dares to embody that truth, something powerful happens. She does not just liberate herself, she opens a doorway. When a woman heals, she heals backward and forward in time. She heals for her mother, who may never have had the vocabulary to name her pain. She heals for her daughter, who will grow up seeing boundaries as normal instead of rebellious. She heals for the women before her who endured silently because survival required silence. And she heals for the women who will come after her, who will never know her name, but will walk a path she helped clear. Every step you take toward yourself is a lantern lit on the road for someone else. Even if this road feels lonely, even if you doubt your strength, even if some days you feel fragile, uncertain, undone, you are not walking alone. Behind you is a river of women returning to themselves, women who are learning to trust their intuition, women who are breaking cycles of emotional suppression, women who are redefining strength as integration, not endurance. Ahead of you stands the integrated woman you are becoming, not perfect, not flawless, not immune to pain, but whole, honest, aligned. And right now, in this exact moment, you do not need a 5-year plan. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not need external validation to proceed. You need one thing. Choose yourself. Choose yourself when it is uncomfortable. Choose yourself when it disrupts expectations. Choose yourself when your old conditioning whispers that it would be easier to shrink. Because the moment you choose yourself, the world begins to reorganize around that decision. Some people will fall away. Some dynamics will dissolve. Some doors will close. Let them. They were built around a version of you that no longer exists. You were never meant to live a small life. You were never meant to ask permission to take up space. You were never meant to perform goodness at the expense of your truth. You are here to live fully, to live honestly, to live with depth, to live as the woman you are becoming, not the one others expected you to remain. There is a quiet power in the eyes of a woman who has walked through her own darkness and returned with herself intact. She does not chase validation. She does not beg to be chosen. She does not twist herself to remain desirable. She stands, and that is enough. If you are in the middle of the fire, stay. If you are in the silence, listen. If you are in the grief, feel it. You are not breaking, you are becoming. And this time, you are not becoming someone else's version of strength. You are becoming your own.